Welcome, Bears fans, to Picks for Polls, a Chicago Bears draft podcast presented by the Bear Report and Blue Wire Pods. My name is Andrew Freeman, and of course, I'm happy to be joined by my co-host, Usayd and Koshul. We record this episode on a Tuesday here, February 21st, as we enter the dog days. Not really the dog days of the offseason, but it's that in-between period where the Super Bowl was last weekend, and we're only a few weeks away from the start of free agency, but there's kind of that moment in between them where it's like nothing is really happening in the NFL right now. There's a lot of rumors going on. And so it almost drives you crazy, you say, at least for me personally, it almost drives you crazy because you just want the action to start, and all you can do is just look at, all the possibilities that are floating out there on Twitter 24/7. But before we get into what we're going to be talking about today, how you doing today, man?
Yeah, I'm doing well. And you mentioned possibilities that are floating around on Twitter. I mean, it's ridiculous. Let's just call it how it is. It's so ridiculous, right? Because you have, speaking of the possibilities, you have Justin Fields, who's been linked to like every quarterback needy team, and the guy's been labeled a bust. He's been labeled a running back. He's been labeled as not the guy moving forward for the Bears. And now the rumors are persisting that, Justin is indeed going to be traded. And I forgot which sportsbook website it was, some no-name one, but they decided to have like an odds for where Justin Fields ends up. And the Buccaneers are the one team to keep watching. And then on top of it, you've got people going back and forth about why Ryan Poles deserves so much criticism for a lot of his veteran free agent signings last offseason. And is Poles really the guy moving forward? It's such an interesting dynamic because I have a feeling, and you guys can quote me on this if you want to, but I have a feeling we're not going to see the big checks written this offseason like some people would have hoped. I think the Bears are going to kind of take a more relaxed approach. You're going to have your handful of signings in free agency, probably more so in wave 2 and 3, just to give this roster some depth, strike some diamonds in the rough, get a player or two or even 3 at bargain deals. And then after you swing for the fences, and then what you're going to see is really much of the focus be the draft, because when we look at Ryan Poles, Ian Cunningham, and Matt Eberflus, I mean, all 3 of them come from organizations where that philosophy of draft and develop talent is the foundation for how the Colts and the Chiefs and the Eagles had their success.
Well, look, I mean, the Bears, they're going to have to spend this offseason. They have to hit the minimum spending floor this year. I think it's like the number that I've been hearing is like $150 million in terms of like cash that they got to spend this year, not cap space, like cash that they got to spend. So that's money that can be, prorated by signing bonuses for future years. I mean, they're going to spend a lot, whether they're going to go after the big names and, put a ton of money into a few players as opposed to a wide variety of players. I mean, that remains to be seen. I mean, you could be right. They could go for a more, volume approach and just get a lot of guys and hope that they can get, like you said, a few diamonds in the rough, a few guys that surprise and can outperform their contracts or whatever, but I mean, that's part of it. So like, it's funny. We talk about, again, I bring up the whole possibilities on Twitter thing. Like, everyone wants the Bears attached to every single big name out there or every single big trade out there, like T. Higgins. Like, can't tell you how many people are like, well, the Bears are obviously going to, go all in to trade for T. Higgins, and they're going to go after Darren Payne and all these big money guys. Saquon Barkley is the newest one. We talk about Saquon Barkley on this podcast quite a bit. It's interesting to see, the dynamic there. And you bring up the Justin Fields whole thing. Like, so first of all, we have to separate the discussion of, the idea of would you trade Justin Fields and draft a quarterback from, would the Bears actually do that? And I don't think we're at that second part yet. Like, there is, I think, an argument to be made for the strategy of, trading Justin Fields and just getting like Bryce Young or something at number 1 overall. That's not what I would do personally, but I think there is a discussion that can be had if it's approached rationally there. But yeah, all the sportsbook putting on, the odds about what team Justin Fields is going to play for, it's like, you know what? There's no indication the Bears have any want to trade Justin Fields at this point. So if I'm a betting man, that's a safe bet for me. I'm putting all my money on the Bears because, yeah, I don't think he's getting traded. It would make no sense to trade him this offseason, given what the comments have been made about Justin. I feel like they feel like he's the guy moving forward. Like I think they're going to give him this year. Like if Justin Fields doesn't make it step this year, then yeah, I think we can have that conversation about whether the Bears move on from him. But I think he showed enough to where I'm not even thinking about that. So if you want to go out there and propose ideas of whether that's the best move for the Bears, go at it. I'm not going to agree with you. I don't think it's going to happen. I'll leave it at that because I don't want to hijack this podcast talking about the whole Justin Fields trade dynamic thing. I just think that's something for a different podcast, a different day. But I talk about this being a slow time in the off-season period, kind of in that in-between time between the Super Bowl and the free agency and the draft and whatnot. We did get some Bears news in terms of a roster move being made. So the Bears cutting Al-Qadim Muhammad, defensive end, who was signed this past offseason. 2 year, he was signed for a 2-year deal, small deal. He was brought in as kind of like a stopgap option at the defensive end spot. He was brought in because he had a familiarity with Matt Eberflus from the Indianapolis Colts. All that stuff, we understand that. Very interesting that they cut him now. Certainly, a guy that got a lot of snaps this past year, didn't really do much with them, wasn't the most productive guy going into things. So I think it's a small move in terms of the small picture here because, Al-Qadim Muhammad, he's not, a big name player. He's not a guy that, is saving the Bears a ton of cap space. It's not like they need to save a ton of cap space. But I think there is, from a big picture standpoint, there is a lot of talk about here from this signing and what it means for the Bears moving forward. And let's just start with the big picture of, Al-Qadim Muhammad was a Ryan Poles guy or a Matt Eberflus guy going into this offseason. So the fact that, they're cutting him this early in the offseason, what do you think that indicates for this regime in terms of their mindset for kind of building this roster and how they value guys that they themselves bring in?
Well, your actions speak louder than your words. And really with this action that the Bears made here, this roster move, it was kind of, hey, we signed you in 2022 simply because you were coming off a year in 2021 with Matt Eberflus in Indianapolis. You started 17 games. You had 6.5 to 7 sacks. It was a career high. We want you to come over here to Chicago. We'll sign you to a 2-year deal and go ahead and just make the jump. Make the jump. Allow some of these younger guys like a Travis Gibson, Dominique Robinson to get better. Let's see what you bring to the defense. Ultimately, Al-Qadim Muhammad really disappointed this past season. And part of it, I think, is simply because Alan Williams was the defensive coordinator, not Matt Eberflus. Flus just has this thing to him where he's able to put his players in a position to succeed. Alan Williams, and again, Alan Williams is very familiar with Eberflus too. Allen was, without a doubt, let's just be honest, incredibly dry at times with some of the formations he tried out onto the field. But getting back to the bigger picture here, I mean, listen, if a player's not producing, you have to move on from him. And it's a really positive sign seeing that the Bears are not going to keep older, aging veterans around and kind of hoping that they figure it out. Why? Because this is traditionally what this franchise has done. You look at the Mark Trestman years, you look at the John Fox years, as well as the Matt Nagy years, and it was always kind of, he's not producing, but we're going to go ahead and keep him around anyway. Let's just see what he can do. Something's going to turn. I mean, listen, in my time covering this team and doing this podcast, I can confidently say Robert Quinn's been the only guy who comes to mind that had a really down year in 2020 and in 2021 set the franchise record for sacks with 18.5 to 19 sacks. And so if you're the Bears, I mean, I think moving on from Al-Quddin Muhammad was warranted, right? You create the extra $4 million in cap space. You have, I think, a project player in Dominique Robinson, who, again, had his flashes last season, but it still wasn't enough because it was clear he was learning the rigors of what it meant to be a pass rusher. And the message it sends throughout your locker room is this: hey, Lucas Patrick, you're not safe. Hey, Cody White here, you're not safe. Hey, Kindle Vildor, you're a guy that could potentially be on the chopping block as well. Which, if we're going to be honest, right, outside of Whitehair, Patrick and Vildor should probably be gone this offseason anyway. And so seeing the Bears move on from these aging vets to make way for younger guys, it's a positive sign of how much roster turnover we're going to see over the next offseason or two.
Yeah, I would throw Justin Jones, defensive tackle, in there as well, just because, I think they're going to overhaul this roster. I think a lot of these guys that they brought in last offseason are clearly stopgap guys that they didn't really have any big plans on them being long-term pieces. I think the way Ryan Poles saw it last year was that if we bring these guys in, we give them a shot, to kind of establish the culture a little bit, give us a solid veteran presence, while we kind of rebuild this roster. And if they prove it to us and they play well and they come on strong, maybe we keep them around for 2023. But if not, we're going to move on from these guys. I think that was the strategy going into it with a lot of these guys. So yeah, I think it goes to show that they're not married to their guys that they bring in here, that if somebody is not performing up to a certain standard, they are going to look to move on. They are going to look to upgrade, and they are going to try to, continue to add talent to this roster any way they can. I do think this also, doing it now, it does kind of help out Muhammad in a way, because he can hit free agency earlier. He can talk to teams now instead of having to wait until free agency begins in the middle of March. So I think there is a little bit of, the Bears saying, we're trying to overhaul this roster. We don't really see you as having a big role for us next year. We want to move on from you right now, give you a chance to talk to teams, and then, just play the business part of the game and give you a better opportunity to get on a team here shortly. So I think there was kind of that aspect of Eberflus maybe wanting to do his guy a solid there, even though he knows that he's probably not a guy that he wants to keep long-term here. So a lot of these guys on the rosters, like you said, I think Whitehair, certainly is going to be an interesting situation, because the Bears, I'm not sure if there's too many upgrade options for him at left guard available in free agency, but he's a guy that, he's getting up there in age. His cap hit is pretty high. They could look to get out of that contract if they feel like they just want to turn over that position there and get, a new face in there. Patrick, I think, is going to be very interesting, coming off the injury he had last year and really just didn't come in and play well whatsoever. They brought him in to be their center. He only played like one game at center, and the one game he plays, he gets injured in. So, just didn't really do what he was brought in to do, if that makes sense. So, yeah, I don't think he can be considered a lock to stay on this roster. Like I said, Jones, I'm not sure he's a lock to stay on this roster. He had his flashes, but I'm not sure he was a consistent guy for that defensive line last year. So yeah, certainly the Bears could be looking to, definitely move on from some guys. Again, they don't need the cap space. They're up to like 100 million right now. I think it's like 85 million in effective cap space, according to overthecap.com. So they still have a ton of money to spend. But yeah, I mean, they're going to be overhauling this roster. They're going to be spending a lot of money. So I guess whatever cap space they can get out of this, they're going to try to get. And it also brings out, I think, with this cut here, it's up with the big picture of how Poles and Eberflus value their guys now. Defensive end is going to be a big position of need for the Bears this offseason. You look at the Bears last year, they had the worst pass rush in the NFL, or at least one of the worst pass rushes. The defensive line in general is probably one of the worst we've seen in the NFL over the last few years. Just not a ton of talent, especially after the Robert Quinn trade. That really fell off a cliff. And Robert Quinn's not even that good of a player anymore, as evidenced by the fact that he did nothing for the Eagles on their Super Bowl run. But you lose a veteran like that, and just everything fell apart for this unit. Muhammad certainly didn't help. Didn't really bring much of an impact as a run defender or as a pass rusher. So when you look at the defensive end spot, it really leaves a lot of questions, I think, about how they will address this. And to me, you said, I don't know about you, what you think. It sounds like they're going to be very aggressive attacking this position.
You're right. Aggressive is the correct word to use for the Bears when it comes to figuring out what they're going to do at defensive end and just across the defensive line in general. I mean, you look at this, right? And I think they're going to draft somebody within the first 2 to 3 rounds. Like, that is no doubt in my mind going to happen to address the D line. But then also, when you kind of get into free agency, there's such an interesting set of players that comes up, right? Because you have Daron Payne from the Washington Commanders, a guy that Bears fans have been so fixated on for pretty much the longest of time. But then beyond Payne, you have guys like a Javon Hargrave. You've got Yannick Ngakoue too from the Colts, and then once again, Larry Ogunjobi. Not that he's going to be the Bears free agent signing, but he's set to go ahead and hit free agency. Jordan Phillips, interior defensive lineman from who's currently with the Buffalo Bills. He's a guy you look at and say, okay, he may be 31 years old, but maybe he'd thrive in a rotational role in this environment. And then you have guys like LJ Collier as well as Trey Flowers too. So I think, look, people have to understand something. And we all got to make an effort to understand this, is that when we look at this free agency class, right, in terms of your interior defensive linemen as well as your pass rushers, right? Yes, there's a lot of talent there, and there's a lot of intriguing names. But ultimately, at the end of the day, you don't want to be in a corner where you're just overpaying to overpay. I think what's going to happen is that once Daron Payne and the Commanders kind of come to a decision about what they're going to do about him, you're going to see this sort of trickle down effect in terms of how the rest of the market is going to go ahead and shape out. And listen, for the Bears, I mean, if I'm being fully honest, you can never have too much depth when it comes to pass rushers. Last offseason proved that, and so now it's going to be much of the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we talked about it last week in our episode, but look how the Eagles built their roster, just being able to go after teams in waves on the defensive line and just having 6, 7, 8 guys that can get after the quarterback and kick ass in the line of scrimmage. Like, that's how you want to build your defensive line so that you can keep these guys fresh and rotate in and just have a lot of options to get after the quarterback. And I think, the Bears, they have the resources to be able to do that this offseason, both in free agency and in the draft. Certainly cap space wise, they have the ability to add, a big name free agent as well as some smaller name free agents. And, you look at the top of this draft here, they're in a position to get one of Jalen Carter or Will Anderson. Even in a trade down scenario, one of those guys could be available to them depending on where they trade down, who they trade down with. So, yeah, I mean, they're going to overhaul this thing. They're going to get a lot of talent. I mean, they cannot go into next year with, as bad of a unit as they had. I don't think it's possible to be as bad as they were on the defensive line going into this year as they were this past season. Like, it was a horror show to watch. Breaking down their pass rushing tape was just made me want to puke every week detailing that thing. But yeah, I mean, I think it goes to show that there are some options here for defensive end. So I think the biggest name on the market when you look at defensive end is probably New Orleans Saints pass rusher Marcus Davenport, a former first round pick, a guy who has shown flashes of being a very dominant player against both the run and the pass. When he's on the field and healthy. I mean, that's the problem with Marcus Davenport, though, is that guy is just never healthy whatsoever. Just always missing games, not playing a high number of snaps because of injuries. So, is that going to be someone the Bears want to bring in and risk that? I don't know. I don't think they probably will, but he's probably the top name out there. I think he's probably the best talent available. I think PFF, they have him graded out as one of the better pass rushers in the NFL just on a per snap basis. So, take that for what it's worth. So, again, I could see Davenport. He kind of fits the bill of what you want in a 4-3 defensive end. He's big, he's long, he's strong, he's an athletic dude. He plays physical at the line of scrimmage, so he kind of fits the mold, I think, of what Eberflus looks for in defensive ends. But again, the injury history thing is just so fascinating with him. Like, what type of deal is he going to want? Is he going to want a long-term deal? Does he get a long-term deal that he wants? What would the Bears be willing to pay in that situation? Yeah, I don't know. But yeah, you mentioned Yannick Ngakoue. He's probably the next biggest name that's going to be out there as well. He's purely a pass rushing specialist. He does not defend the run whatsoever. He's really just a guy that thrives in a wide 9 alignment where, you get him way outside the tackle and just use his speed to get around the edge and gets to the quarterback. That's literally all he does. But there is a lot of value in having a guy that can do that, on those third down situations. So how much is he going to be worth? He's still a relatively young player, I think. I think he's going to be 28 years old going into next year. So definitely not an older player. He's a veteran. He's been in the league for a while, but he definitely still has some juice. He definitely has a few years left in him where you feel like he can be a guy that can contribute for, the next multiple amount of years, not just a 1-year rental, so to speak. But after that, I mean, you got veterans like Jadeveon Clowney's out there. I don't know if you'd be interested in him. He kind of fits the mold physically of what you want in a 4-3 defensive end, but health and inconsistency has always been, his biggest issue. In terms of some like under the radar guys that I think the Bears could be looking to go after, like I really like Charles Omenihu or the guy from the Jaguars, Arden Key. I think those two guys would be perfect fits for what Eberflus wants typically in defensive ends. You go back to Eberflus's time in Indianapolis. He loves having big-bodied defensive ends that can, play on the outside on first and second down and kind of act as like pseudo run defenders for you. And then on third downs, they kick inside and they just bring a different element to their pass rush because they just have, too much quickness, too much length for a lot of these interior offensive linemen to handle. So I think, those two names as under the radar guys, relatively young players, could be options for the Bears if they want to go that route. I will say this, it's not a great free agency class in terms of the defensive end position. So you're likely looking at the draft to address this as well. And, fortunately, we're going to be getting into our position previews coming up shortly over the next few weeks. But defensive end, I think, this edge group is an awesome group for this draft. So I think if they're going to address this anywhere, the draft is going to be a spot where they really, I think, attack this position hard as well.
Yeah, you're right. And it's kind of the formula in the NFL now. You look at guys like Nick Bosa, Myles Garrett, and again, those are just two to name a handful, but teams are just continuing to draft these star pass rushers more and more and making that investment as they build out the defensive side of the ball. It is not like it's interesting because we've seen edge rushers get paid over the last couple of years, but those guys have mostly been on rookie contracts. Very rarely do we see, big time edge rushers hit the free agent market and then all of a sudden they are getting paid handsomely. So and the interesting thing I think is when you look at this edge rusher class, right? Obviously you've got guys like Will Anderson that are going to take the cake, but then you've got Tyree Wilson as well, who I think some people argue that Wilson's better than Anderson. Totally separate debate we'll have a few weeks down the line. But then you also have guys like a Miles Murphy, right? Or a Brian Breezy too. One guy that I think is my personal favorite, who I think is a sleeper on day 2, early day 3, Ohio State Zach Harrison. Lucas Van Ness from Iowa, a guy that has really caught the attention of scouts. So if the Bears do this thing right, we could be talking about a possibility where you've got 2 rookie edge rushers getting after the quarterback in 2023.
Yeah, I mean, the Bears could add 2-3 guys this offseason between the draft and free agency, and I think that would be a really smart strategy, because this is a good year to address the edge position. Some other names I'll throw out there, and again, like you said, we're going to be covering this position coming up soon for position previews. Like, it's going to be a really fun group to cover. But I'll throw out some other names kind of just to tease our fans out there for guys we're going to be talking about. But Keon White, I think out of Georgia Tech, I believe, is the school. He's at the Senior Bowl. He's a freak athlete. He's like 6'5", 290 pounds, but, has the, speed and quickness and just rare athleticism for a guy at that size at the edge spot. So he's a guy to watch out for. I look at Felix Uzama, I think, from Kansas State. Let me get the name right here because he's a guy that, Felix Anudike Uzama from Kansas State. He's a guy that really caught my eye as a day 2 prospect. I really like his game. I think he's a perfect fit in a 4-3 scheme. Again, we're going to be getting into these guys. I'm kind of excited about wanting to talk with these guys now, but I got to have some patience here and wait a little bit to talk about these guys a little bit more in depth. But yeah, this is just a freaky class for edge rushers, especially if you're looking for 4-3 defensive ends and in the mold of what Eberflus wants. Like, yeah, I'm really liking this class. I'm digging it, and I think that the Bears are going to dig it as too. And that I think, like you said, they're probably going to be addressing this. They may draft a guy early on day 1 or day 2, and they might draft another guy on day 3 too, because there is a lot of depth I think is going to be going into day 3 of this draft, to where they could find another sleeper there if they want to double dip at that position. So yeah, I think the plan is clear here, though. When you look at this entire thing, like, they are going to attack the trenches this offseason. I think that is a given, a guarantee. I don't think they're going to be satisfied with the offensive line that they rolled out there this past year. They certainly aren't going to be satisfied with the defensive line, which was just embarrassing at times, that they rolled out there last year. And none of these guys in this roster are safe. Everyone is, competing for a job. Even guys that they bring in here and, give decent money to, there's going to be a standard set here to where, if you're not playing up to the standards here, we're going to look to move on and upgrade. And, I hope that they keep that mindset, that aggressive mindset throughout the offseason. They have to be aggressive this year, and we'll just see, where that takes them. But, certainly, kind of branching off of that, the last major topic we'll discuss here for today's episode has to do with the fact that the franchise tag window has officially started. I think it started either yesterday or today, and it goes all the way until the start of free agency in March. So what this means is teams have about a few weeks or to about a month here to decide whether they want to tag players that are hitting free agency, and basically they have that window to decide. They can decide now, they can decide later. Usually what teams do is they kind of wait a little bit so they can kind of plan out their off season first and, get their cap situation straight and finances straight, whether, so that way they can decide whether they actually want to go ahead and tag players. Some of these are pretty obvious decisions. Some of these, though, are, pretty tough. And there could be a situation where a lot of guys that are talented players who could be tagged end up hitting the market because teams end up deciding that they want to go and try a different direction here. So what we're going to do is we're going to be going over the major franchise tag options here, and we're going to give our predictions on whether they hit the market or not. And then we're going to decide, talk about how we think that affects the Bears in terms of their free agency strategy. And I think we mentioned this guy earlier, but De'Aaron Payne, I think, is probably the biggest domino of the fall on the defensive side of the ball for free agents, because if he hits the market, I think a lot of teams are going to view him as the top interior defensive lineman on the market. when you combine his production last year to his first-round pedigree to his age, still in the prime of his career, coming off of a career season from a pass rushing standpoint, he's a guy that I think the Bears certainly would be very interested in if he hit the market. So Usayd, I'll start with you on this one. Do you think he hits the market? Do you think he gets tagged? And, if he does get tagged, how does that impact the Bears strategy?
I think he does not hit the market. He absolutely gets the tag. And then for the Bears, this is going to suck, yes. But at the end of the day, people have to, we all look. At the end of the day, the way this goes is this: is Payne's going to get the tag, and he's going to get the tag simply because Ron Rivera knows and values a top defensive talent like Daron Payne when he sees one, right? You look at it, and that Washington front seven, let's just be honest, it's no joke. They've got Montez Sweat, Jonathan Allen. Then on top of that, you have Chase Young there too, who I understand missed a significant portion of the 2022 season. Daron Payne might just be the best of them all. And you're talking about a unit that's got like 4 first rounders. For the Bears, I mean, the implications are simple. Then you turn your attention to a guy like a Javon Hargrave. Is it Javon Hargrave? Daron Payne? No. But he's the next best thing. Which, again, if you're this team and your plan A doesn't work out, you better have a good plan B, C, or D to bring someone in.
Yeah, I'll say this for me, whether Payne gets tagged or not, it doesn't really change my mindset on things. Like, I know a lot of people, I think you say you kind of view Payne as the top guy in the market for defensive tackles in this free agency class. In my opinion, I do think Hargrave is the best guy in the market, regardless of whether Payne, gets tagged or not. So for me, it doesn't really change my thinking for the Bears' strategy at defensive tackle. I think the Bears would be happy with either of those two guys because both kind of fit what they kind of need. Although Payne's kind of more of a one tech, I think, traditionally, like he's kind of used in a variety of ways in Washington, but yeah, he was kind of drafted as a one tech. He's kind of developed into more of a pass rushing role as his career has gone on. But Hargrave kind of fits that true 3-tech role with his pass rushing ability, his ability to get upfield, his ability to penetrate and be disruptive. So, that's why he's kind of like the guy for me if he hits the market. I don't think he gets tagged by Philly because Philly's kind of in a tough cap space situation right now. Hargrave's contract voided, I think, today as well. So he's already leaving a cap charge on the Eagles salary cap anyway. I think it's like $11 million that he's costing the Eagles not to be on the team. So, for me, like I love Hargrave, so he would be my guy. So, but I mean, again, Payne's a big domino to fall still for a lot of teams because then that makes Hargrave the number one guy in the market, I think, and he's going to be getting a lot of offers this offseason from a lot of teams. Like the Browns, I think, are going to be in on Hargrave because of their woes at defensive tackle. He could wind up staying in Philadelphia if he's able to match if they're able to match, his price in the open market. I think a lot of teams are going to be interested in Javon Hargrave's circles, and certainly not having a guy like Daron Payne raises his price tag even more if the Bears are interested and want to bring him in. But moving on to some other guys here, let's talk about Orlando Brown Jr. I think he's a guy that he was tagged this past year by the Kansas City Chiefs. There's a lot of speculation, do the Chiefs tag him again? They weren't able to get a long-term deal done. Personally, I personally think that Brown gets tagged again, Usayd, because of the importance of the left tackle position. He's going to be viewed as the top guy in the market if he does hit the market. What's your thought on the Brown situation?
Well, I think he ends up hitting the market. And I say this simply because when you look at Brett Veach as well as Andy Reid, not only are those two really good at identifying talent, I mean, when you have the best quarterback in the world, you kind of are free to build your roster however you want to. But what's going to happen is they replace him. They let him walk in free agency, let him kind of test the open market, but keep an open ear, right? And if the price is reasonable, they extend an offer to Orlando and bring him back while he's looking at the open market. If not, then they just turn their attention to the NFL draft and look for a right tackle or a left tackle to go ahead and start. And I will say this, it's worth noting, right? Because Orlando's classified as a left tackle, but you could certainly see the Chiefs going ahead and making a play for a guy such as a Greg Little, for example, or a Ty Nishiki, or even somebody such as Cedric Ogubi, in order to kind of help solidify the left side of that line until you figure out a long-term replacement.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see what the Chiefs do with Brown, because he was a key part of their offensive line over the past 2 years. Yeah, and we'll see what happens there. Certainly, they need a blindside protector for Mahomes. There are a couple quarterbacks that are set to hit the market this offseason. Lamar Jackson is the top name, obviously, on that list. I mean, a former MVP. The fact that they haven't been able to reach a deal with Baltimore, it's kind of crazy at this point how that hasn't been resolved. That's a really murky contract situation right now between those two sides. But also, Geno Smith is on the market as well. He's probably looking to get tagged by the Seahawks after he had a breakout season this past year. I think both these guys are going to be in a position to be tagged. I think both will get tagged. You don't let franchise, especially Lamar Jackson, you don't let a franchise quarterback like that go for free. And Geno Smith, I think he played so well for the Seahawks last year that you kind of want to tag him and at least see where this goes and see if you can get kind of an extension done. But what I want to talk about here with Jackson is, do we think the Ravens hold on to him long term? Because if Lamar Jackson becomes available via trade, for a tag and trade situation, which is certainly possible given what we've been hearing about Lamar Jackson and how contract negotiations have gone between him and the Ravens. That is a huge domino. That affects a lot of things. It affects the draft market. What teams are going to be looking to trade up with the Bears for number one overall. Especially if it goes to a team like Atlanta or Carolina, two quarterback needy teams, they're going to be available. Like, heck, maybe even the Texans would be willing to, go all in for Lamar Jackson. The Jets could be interested if they want to go all in. So certainly a lot of options there. What are your thoughts on the Lamar Jackson situation, Usayd?
I mean, it's messy, and it's messy like that when you have your mom representing you as a quote-unquote agent. No disrespect to the Jackson family, but Lamar needs to get an agent. Well, what is this? Is the Lamar Jackson situation is about as messy as it's gotten, because both sides are willing to basically not give up and not give the other side any leeway. You've got the Ravens who are saying, "Hey, Lamar, this is what we think you're worth." You've got the Lamar Jackson side saying, "This is what I think I'm worth." And let me just say this. You mentioned a couple AFC teams. If the Ravens trade Lamar Jackson, I certainly think it's out of the AFC into the NFC, just because that's kind of the trend we see with a lot of these major trades that go down. The other thing is that Lamar, right? I just don't think he gets traded, because you're going to shake up the draft board for the next 2 to 3 years. And ultimately, I don't think a team is necessarily confident giving up, 3 first rounders for him and signing him to the highest deal or what basically gets him a fully guaranteed contract. I think the two sides are going to come to an agreement. It's going to take much longer than expected, but I do expect Lamar to receive the franchise tag.
Yeah, I mean, the Ravens are a smart organization, so I think they will. I think they're going to try to hold on to Lamar this year and try to play it out, and see if they can get something done long term. If they can't, maybe they consider the trade option next offseason. We'll see, though. I think they do want to give it a try. They brought in Todd Monken as their offensive coordinator. I think they do want to give it a try with Lamar, with a different offensive coordinator besides Greg Roman, and see if he can kind of expand his game a little bit, and maybe that influences them. But the big issue here is Lamar Jackson wants a fully guaranteed contract, and the Ravens, who are typically very, very generous in terms of giving out guaranteed money to their players. Like, you look at the contracts they give out, they will, usually do a little bit lower in terms of total value and average per year value, but they always have an astronomically high amount of guaranteed money that they give out on extensions for players. So when I heard that the issue, or when I heard the rumors that the issue came down to guarantee money, I was kind of perplexed because the Ravens are usually very good about handing out guaranteed money to their players. So, it has to be that Lamar Jackson wants the Deshaun Watson deal, and the Ravens were saying, "Nah, that's not happening. We're not setting that precedent, or we're not following that precedent. Like, you're going to sign in line with some of the other quarterbacks. We're going to give you a lot of guarantee money, but fully guarantee is not happening." So, that's kind of the impasse right now. We'll see if they get that worked out, but certainly a huge name to keep in mind for the franchise tag, as that looms large, I think, for both sides of that negotiation. Moving on here, there are a couple teams that have multiple players that could be considered for a franchise tag. We'll start with kind of a smaller one. The Jacksonville Jaguars have, Jawan Taylor, right tackle, that they could be looking to tag this offseason, as well as tight end Evan Ingram, who had a breakout year for them on a one-year deal that they signed last offseason for them. Interesting situation. I'm not sure if either gets a tag. If they do, I'm kind of inclined to think that Evan Ingram would get the tag, given how he played for the Jaguars last year and his importance in that passing game for Doug Peterson and Trevor Lawrence. The Jaguar situation, Usayd, how do you see that playing out?
I think Taylor hits the open market. The Jags have been pretty solid at drafting O-linemen over the last couple of years. There should be somebody waiting in the wings to take Taylor's spot. I see Evan Ingram getting that franchise tag, much like you said, simply because he's got this unparalleled chemistry with Trevor Lawrence, and it would be foolish to kind of break that up.
Yeah, absolutely. And then another team that I think is probably the biggest story when it comes to the franchise tag, or one of the bigger stories when it comes to franchise tag, is what do the Giants do with their situation? Because their two players have to hit the market. Their two biggest names, I should say, are quarterback Daniel Jones, who is coming off a year where, the stats weren't like prolific or anything, but, did a nice job for them under his first year under Brian Dable. After getting his fifth-year option denied by the team their first year for their new regime, had a pretty nice season, leading them to the playoffs within that offense as a kind of a game manager for them. But the Giants had to kind of counterbalance that with the fact that Saquon Barkley is also a free agent. And Saquon Barkley, he's one of the more talented running backs in football. Certainly a guy worthy of, I think in most years, you want to give him the tag because he is a talented player. And this creates a lot of issues. Like, what do the Giants value? Do they value paying your running back long-term money? In that case, would they tag Saquon Barkley with the hopes of, signing him to a long-term deal? And then how do they value Daniel Jones here? Do they think he's, a guy that can be a franchise quarterback moving forward? There's rumors that, he's looking to get for upwards of $45 million a year, which to me is insane. But, it would be nuts. It sounds like the Giants are really determined to bring Daniel Jones back, though, given how he played last year. Like, what do you make of this Giants situation? Because this seems like this could create a bunch of ripple effects for the way free agency operates in the next coming weeks.
Well, it's going to be a trickle-down effect. You need to get Daniel Jones to sign first, and that's going to put Saquon Barkley on the outside looking in. And again, he's just going to leave via free agency. Daniel Jones is not worth $45 million a year. Daniel Jones is a quarterback that I have kind of berated harshly on every podcast I've been on. He's come up since he was entered into the league in 2019. But the reality of the situation is this, is that for Daniel Jones, this is all about just him getting the money he wants to, which is completely fine because in our real life day jobs, you and I would try to get, or just in general, people would try and get as much money as they could. What matters though here is this, is can he follow up 2023 with a much better performance in 2022? Because it was clear last time, or last year at this time, he was kind of learning the offense. Things were so new to him. He was just beginning to build that relationship with Kafka as well as Brian Dable. And now all of a sudden, it's going to kind of be, hey, can you go ahead and can you do all of this on your own? And while doing so, can you take us to the next level? Saquon Barkley, I think he hits the open market simply because he's the odd guy looking in. Joe Shane's not afraid to let running backs go simply because Joe Shane is the one. He did not draft Saquon Barkley. That was a Dave Gettleman mistake, but Joe Shane obviously is going to cut ties with a player no matter how talented he is if that player does not fit the vision of the team.
Yeah, it's a very interesting situation. I think the smart move, man, I don't even know what to make of this. Honestly, if I'm the Giants, there's a reason why they declined Daniel Jones' fifth-year option. And that's because they felt like going into that Daniel Jones had not proven anything in his first 3 seasons that showed he's a franchise quarterback. And when you look at Daniel Jones and the way he played this past season, again, you can't always go by the stat sheet because, there's so much that goes into quarterbacks, statistical production outside of his play. But you look at, Daniel Jones' stats from this past year. He only threw 15 touchdown passes. He only threw just over 3,000 yards despite starting almost every single game. His efficiency across the board was pretty average for the most part when compared to the rest of the league. He certainly didn't blow anybody away in terms of being overly efficient. I mean, he basically had an Alex Smith season when he was with the Chiefs. Instead, he had that in 2022 when passing numbers are a little bit more ridiculous and quarterbacks are asked to do a lot more than what they were asked to do when Alex Smith was in his heyday in Kansas City during the mid 2010s. So, do you want to pay a guy like that $40 million, $45 million a year? Like, I just think that is insane to me. To me, if I were the Giants, because I'm also in the camp where I'm not a big fan of handing out running backs big money extensions unless they're truly special elite of the elite. And Saquon Barkley, while he is that guy, on paper, I feel like his name is a little bit better. I feel like his name speaks more than his actual game, if that makes any sense. And now that it's not that Saquon Barkley isn't a spectacular talent, he's a special talent, but he's already had injury problems in the past. He hasn't lived up, I think, to being the number 2 overall pick that he was in the 2018 draft, which is hard for any running back to do in the modern day NFL. But I mean, he's really only had one truly special season. His rookie year was a special year. This year, he definitely got back close to that form I think that he was as a rookie, but wasn't quite there. I don't think. I think he's a great back. I think he's a top 5 to 8 back in the NFL. I'm not sure if he's a guy that is like a guy that I feel comfortable paying big money long term. And certainly this brings up the discussion of if he hits the market, do the Bears end up bringing him in? And honestly, I've been on this train for this entire discussion throughout the offseason. No, I am not a big fan of that signing. Like, I love Saquon Barkley, the player. He's a very exciting player. If the Bears were to bring him in on a big deal and whatnot, I would be rooting hard. I'd be rooting a lot for him on Sundays. I'd be very excited with the way he plays. I would be oohing and ahhing and all that stuff. But I don't think it's the best move for the long-term outlook of the franchise when you look at the running back position and what it means. So, yeah, that's a tough situation. So if I'm the Giants, I think the way I'd handle this is I would tag Saquon Barkley just so you get one more year of use out of him. The franchise tag for running backs isn't too much. It's like $10 million, I think, which is not a lot whatsoever for a 1-year proposition. They have a ton of cap space to work with anyway. And then you try to work out a long-term deal with Daniel Jones for like a 3 or 4 year deal. That's not too crazy. Like $35 million is the most I would go. If he's not willing to, get that price, then I let Daniel Jones go. I try to bring in a veteran stopgap if he goes elsewhere. And then, either I'm looking to trade up for one of these guys in this year's draft, it's going to be tough to do given where they're at, or I just let it all go for a year and try to get at one of these guys to next year's draft, because I think that's kind of the smart move to do if I'm the Giants. They kind of got to the playoffs this year in a fluky way anyway, so I'm not sure if they're truly a playoff team. I don't think they're a legitimate playoff team when you consider all the factors here. They were kind of lucky last year to be in the position they were at. So But it looks like they are going to be trying to sign Daniel Jones long term. And if that happens, so good luck, Giants fans. Good luck. Last two players I want to cover here also happens to be at the running back position. It's, again, the running back class, when you look at the draft and free agency, is pretty dang good this year. But a couple running backs that could be, getting the franchise tag. We look at Josh Jacobs, who I think he led the league in rushing last year, if I'm not mistaken. Had a heck of a dang good year for Josh McDaniels and that Raiders offense last year. And Tony Pollard, one of the most explosive weapons in the NFL. You say, do you think those guys get tagged? And if they don't, do you think the Bears are interested in bringing any of those guys in?
I don't think either of them get tagged. I think that for them, their days in Dallas and Las Vegas, respectively, are over. Josh Jacobs, just a guy who does not really fit the mold of running backs that Josh McDaniels is looking for. Josh Jacobs is more so the old school running back who's a power runner, kind of north-south guy between the tackles. That was kind of John Gruden's style of running as well. Just a really hard runner with a bit of burst. You look at Tony Pollard, he is a Swiss Army knife, but also at the end of the day, you can place him in multiple positions. I mean, the Cowboys are going to try to figure this thing out with Zeke. So if the Cowboys get it figured out with Zeke, then Tony Pollard's out the door. If they don't get it figured out, well, then Zeke's probably going to demand a trade or hit the open market. And then you're going to have Tony Pollard, who's going to be the lead back in Dallas in 2023.
Yeah, I'll say this is how it goes. I think because of how cheap the running back franchise tag is, I think Tony Pollard and Josh Jacobs get tagged. I don't think they'll let either of those two guys go. The Raiders, I think they're, they saw how good Josh Jacobs was for them last year. They declined his fifth-year option for a reason, so maybe they're not in love with him as an organization, but he was so good that I think you got to bring him back for one more year. He's still a young player. He's still really dang good. So I think they bring him back as kind of be their bell cow for one more year. And then for the Cowboys, I think it all depends on how they want to handle Zeke. I think if they're able to negotiate a pay cut with Zeke, or if they're able to cut Zeke to save some money, I think they bring back Pollard on the tag as well. But I think it's going to be dependent on, what is Zeke willing to sacrifice here? Because if Zeke takes a pay cut, you're not going to pay Tony Pollard and Ezekiel Elliott, big time money here at the same time. That's not going to happen. Zeke's going to have to either be cut or sacrifice some money if they want to bring Tony Pollard back. I think Zeke will be willing to do it because of, how much the Cowboys organization has stood behind him throughout the years, and the fact that, they've been willing to go on with this albatross of a contract for how many years that he's been signed. But, Tony Pollard, I think they know the value that he brings to that offense. I think they're going to try to do what they can to keep him at least for this season, because they're in a competitive window. They want to win now. And Pollard is the guy that gives them the best opportunity to do so. So with that, I think that's going to wrap it up for us today. We certainly covered a lot in terms of, franchise tags, Bear strategy going into this off season, all that stuff. For all of the listeners out there, make sure to like, rate, and subscribe to the podcast, Picks for Polls podcast, wherever you listen to us, especially at the Blue Wire. Make sure to give us a follow as well on social media. Our Twitter profile is @PicksForPolls, so make sure you give us a follow there if you're interested in getting more draft coverage as we go along here in the draft process. We have the draft combine coming up shortly. We have pro days. We have position previews, all that stuff leading up to the draft in late April. Usayd, for our listeners out there, where can they follow you on social media, and where can they find your work?
You guys can follow me on social media at Usayd Koshul. Check out my work on the Bear Report. Gonna have a lot of scouting reports dropping over the next 2 weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. Make sure to give Usayd a follow. As for me, you can follow me on Twitter at AJFreeman25. You can find my work on the Bear Report as well. I recently put out there my first part of my mock offseason for this upcoming 2023 offseason for the Bears. For this part, I put together what I would do basically if I was the GM for the Bears, and I covered free agency for this first section. So definitely check that out if you're looking to get into the possibilities for what the Bears could be doing this offseason. But, if not, if you're just looking for just Bear coverage in general, definitely check out the Bear Report and all the work that we have for all of our writers that are there that are working hard this offseason and putting out a lot of content. So make sure to support them and support what they do. With that said, that's going to do it for us today. For Bears fans out there, 1 week closer to free agency fans, hang in there. It's going to get exciting soon. But until next time, Bears fans, have yourself a great weekend and bear down.